Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Monir El Azzouzi from easymedicaldevice.com. And today we will talk about software lifecycle, software maintenance. We'll talk about a specific standard, which is the IEC 62304. And for that, I have with me Adnan Ashfaq. So we had Adnan on a previous episode related to process validation. So Adnan is the founder and principal consultant at Pharmi Med Ltd. So Adnan, welcome again to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Thank you once again, Monir. Thanks for having me back on the show again.
No problem. So Adnan, just maybe for people that don't remember you or didn't look at the process validation episode, so can you just make a small introduction?
Yes, sure, absolutely. So, hello again, and hello to viewers if they're seeing me for the first time. So, I work in the medical device industry since 1999, so over 20 years. Work in all sorts of medical devices, small companies, large companies, medium-sized companies, helping a lot of startup companies in the regulatory space to try and get their CE marking and medical devices into CE marking. Also, the jurisdictions. Put in quality management systems. So really all areas within medical device regulatory and quality requirements that are needed in order for compliance perspectives. That's what I'm doing, and that's what I enjoy. So great to be here.
Great, thank you for that. As we said, so last time we talked about process validation, but this time we'll really talk about a specific topic, which is software lifecycle management. So how we are working with the software, what kind of standards we have to apply, and we know the standard IEC 62304, and you will help us to understand it better. So in few words, who has to use this standard? Is it a standard that is mandatory, or is there something that is kind of helpful for any people that are developing software within this standard?
Yeah, so definitely 62304 is a hot potato, absolutely hot potato. It's specifically because now that the EU MDR is amongst us since 2017, if we cast our minds back since the directive was 1993, so over the space of 24 years or plus years, there's been so much advancement in technology. And all of that is using software. It's software which is embedded into a printed circuit board, which might be in an electromechanical device which is controlling it. So fundamentally, what's at stake here is the safety of the device, which is being driven by the software itself. So this is the main issue. What the notified bodies and what the competent authorities are trying to pin down with legal manufacturers to make sure that compliance and safety standards are being met. So this is actually all about safety. So this is the first thing that I want to mention. So 62304 is the fundamental standard, but also alongside that is 82304, which is another standard, which is IT health management software. But the interesting thing is, if you look at 82304, it actually points you back towards 62304. So this is really the main standard that we should be talking about today.
Okay, and so it's something that is specific to software, as you mentioned. So is there a specific, are we talking about all medical device software, or are we talking about a specific class of software, or is there some kind of exception in terms of software that don't need to use this standard?
Well, I think the main thing what every manufacturer needs to do, software or no software, is the fundamental thing which I always advise manufacturers is make sure that you know your intended purpose.
Yeah.
The intended use and intended purpose drives everything, and that is so important, because the first thing that the manufacturer has to do is, do we qualify as a medical device? Does it have a medical intended purpose? Is there a clinical safety or clinical benefit? Once we know this, we can then drive towards the classifications, because then we have to have a look at the safety, and depending on the impact to patient, if it can lead to death, or if it leads to injury or serious injury or minor injury, we can then start looking at the classifications of the software. So software can be independent software, which is being run on a server somewhere, or a cloud-based software. It can be software which is running in an electromechanical device, as I said. But one thing I just wanted to make clear, just so that the audience is very clear upon, because not to be confused with CSV. CSV is computer software validation, actually. Okay, so this is something which is also very hot amongst auditors and FDA and competent authorities, where you have processes which actually have software driving a process which is manufacturing a medical device. This is not what we're talking about. What we're discussing now is software as a medical device. The software itself is the medical device. Or the medical device is driven by software. This is the thing that we need to discuss.
No, it's great. I think, there is also this guidance from MDCG, I can't remember the number, that is also
2019. It's 2019-11.
Okay, so this one is really helping also to define, to qualify if a certain software is a medical device, and also to help in terms of classification. So I think, as you've said, we have first to go to this route before really to arrive to the next level, which is maybe this standard, and if we have to apply it. 62304 is only for medical devices, or it can be for any other software?
It's specifically for medical devices. Okay. There are other applications also. So there is 12207, 61508, and 90003, which is also for software development lifecycle, but they're not specifically for medical devices. 62304 is specific for medical devices.
No, great. In terms of standards, so we talked about classification of products. When I read the first time the 62304, they were also talking about a certain classification inside, class A, B, C. So is there, just to avoid maybe some confusion to people that are saying, oh, my software is class A, B, C, and people are maybe thinking now about the IVDR classification. So can we say if there is any relationship between the EU MDR classification or IVDR classification and this IEC 62304 classification?
Right. That's a very, very good point. And it's an excellent point, because I've come across some recent conversations where people have been confused with this. So not to be confused, there are two separate classifications for sure. So no doubt about that. So first of all, there's the overall medical device classification, either a class 1, 2A, 2B, and class 3 in the European jurisdiction, or class 1, class 2, class 3 for the FDA. But let's concentrate on the European Union for CE marking. Once you have identified class 2A, B, or 3, or class 1, then we look at the safety classification, which 62304 then determines. But what it does is it automatically defaults your classification as a class C, which is the worst category, which means that your software can lead to a critical harm, such as death. It can actually lead to death. So serious deterioration of health, or serious injury or death. And then what you need to do is you need to ask you some questions. And the questions are based on risk. And if you look at the hazards from the risks that the software can create, it can then be declassified to a B or an A. B meaning that it can lead to a minor injury, non-serious injury, and A, it can lead to no injury. So there's a slight differentiation, different classification.
Yeah, and if I remember well, the EU MDR classification was also using the same terms to help classify your product. So it's telling you if it is really dangerous or not, can lead to death or serious injury, etc. So I suppose the auditors will also look between the class that you attribute within the IEC 62304 and the one that you go within the EU MDR. If they are not really aligned, there is also maybe some issues here.
Right. So the one thing that we have to have a look at is, although we have 62304, one of the key relationship diagrams is actually within the standard. There's a figure, which is a flow chart, figure C.1, which is the relationship of all of the key standards to 62304. And within that, risk management ISO 14971, usability engineering 62366, and also if it's electromechanical, then 60601, you need to have a look at the medical electrical safety, 61010, and 82304 if it's IT health management. You have to have a look at the overall holistic picture and how everything is interlinking. But one of the key documents which we didn't mention also is the IMDRF documentation. The IMDRF which, if people aren't familiar, used to be the GHTF, the Global Harmonization Task Force, which was superseded to the IMDRF documentation. Now, there are 4 critical documents which are very, very useful in understanding and developing your documentation for 62304. And within one of them, there is one for clinical management, and also for risk management also. And it helps you to identify and guide you for the safety classification, because sometimes you have software which is driving clinical management, it's implementing clinical management, or there's 3 classifications. I don't remember the third one. There's 3 different categorizations, and it looks towards the risk scenario of what can happen as an outcome from the software. Can it lead to death? Can it lead to a major threat or some kind of injury or just inconvenience? And this is why, coming back to it, the important thing is going back to ISO 14971 and your risk management, because everything is driven by risk management. Once you have your intended purpose clarified, your intended purpose has to feed into your risk management exercise, your FMEA, or whichever process you use. And from that, you then need to determine what will be the harms from each of the potential failures. And if you think that death can be occurred by the failure of misusing or any of the design hazards within the software, then there's a possibility that this could become a Class C safety classification, but it still may not be a Class 3 medical device. It might still be a Class 2A or a Class 2B. And the determining factor is actually time. And some people don't know this. So, for example, let's look at examples. You might have something like a predictive cardiac arrest software. If the algorithms or software fails because of the calculation and somebody goes into cardiac arrest, and the dependency on the software is that the clinicians depend on the software to predict the cardiac arrest, and somebody dies because of a failure of not calculating the prediction correctly due to a failure of the algorithm, this is automatically Class C and Class 3, because we know that is death, but the time interval is immediate as well. Immediately can lead to death. On the other hand, we might have some predicting software which is predicting that somebody has cancer and they're going to die in 6 months. So the safety classification may be a class C because it can lead to death, or it might be a Class B because it can be immediately it's not going to lead to death, but long term it can. So here we have an argument to lower the safety classification from a Class C to a Class B, but within the overall MDR classification, it might still be a Class 3.
Exactly.
So this is what
it's helping, if I can say, in terms of the classification. I mean, as we said, the classification of EU MDR and the classification of the IEC 62304 do have different purposes. The one for EU MDR is to find which conformity assessment we have to follow, and the one for IEC 62304 is to find what are the processes that you have to implement for this software. Because when you look at the standard, there is each chapter, and it says this chapter is for Class A, B, C. This one is for Class B and C only, etc., etc. So it gives you which chapter, which phase is applicable to that. So it's really giving you a different things. But IEC 62304 was existing before also, so it's not like a new standard. With the Medical Device Directive 9342 EC, nearly all software were Class 1. So it's more also something that was also to be considered, the fact that a software was Class 1, but it can have maybe a Class C risk within IEC 62304. So is it a possibility, and is it something that led to a lot of issues, you think?
One of the things that's led to an issue also is the classifying of medical devices that have gone from a Class 1 previously, and suddenly they're now Class 2A or something else. You know, sometimes they've had no notified body intervention before, and this is because the definition and what, sorry, before I go to the definition, is actually the introduction of a new rule in the MDR.
Yeah.
So previously in the MDD we had 18 rules, and now in the MDR we have 22 rules. And one of the rules, which is a new one, is Rule 11.
Yeah.
And Rule 11 is all about software. So here we have some interesting words within the definition of Rule 11, which looks at software which is intending to provide information, which is used for decisions, which also diagnose for therapeutic purposes or intended for physiological purposes. But it can also be something which is predicting or monitoring, for alleviation of disease. So, and there's a lot of devices which can be classified, software which is classified for these purposes. And very often you get into an argument or a debate with manufacturers saying, oh, well, we're not actually monitoring anything, we're just recording information.
Okay.
So this becomes a bit of a legal terminology now. Is at what point do we differentiate between intended information, it's only for information purposes, and we will not do anything with the information, or it will actually be used for a purpose? Because then if it's just being used for information, then what's the purpose of your device?
I have some clients that come to me with also these arguments to say my device or my software is only for information, but the doctor can do whatever he wants with that. So it's not a guide like he has to do that, but it's just an indication or an information so that he can use if he wants, which they try really, as I said, to reduce as low as possible the implication of their software. But as you mentioned at the end, what is the purpose of it if at the end the information you are providing is not really a guide, or is not really helping anything, or is not providing any information that is for diagnosis or for helping to diagnose a disease. So as you mentioned, maybe there is really a fine line in terms of the definitions. What means monitoring? What means decision technique? What means prognosis? Maybe having more clarity on that can help. But I see already some manufacturers that are really trying to play on those words to say my device is a class 1 and not a class 2A or 2B because of that or that or that. So it's really interesting.
So one of the critical points, just to expand on that also, is when you have clinical intervention, that makes a difference. So, for example, if the software is providing information, but it's predicting or monitoring something, and there is no clinical intervention, and let's say a healthcare practitioner, a nurse, or somebody uses the information for the final decision, this is where the criticality is very high. But if there's information that's being used, and a clinician, a doctor, or a surgeon uses that information and then makes the final decision, and just for extra, let's say, added data to make the final prognosis and the final decision, then there is a difference. And this is where the category of risk lowers, because there's intervention already happened. It's when there's, because we're talking about automation, and remember, there's also artificial intelligence taking place as well. This is another area, artificial intelligence, but we're not going to go to artificial intelligence because this is actually a very complex subject. There's the whole arena of artificial intelligence, and I know FDR actually, they're documenting, they've proposed a document since I think April 2019 to go into this whole subject area, machine learning and all this type of thing. But so now you've got technology which is so advanced and is advancing and is being used for final decisions with no intervention. This is where the risk is the highest.
I think it's really important here. In terms of the IEC 62304 again, if I want to apply it, do I need to be a kind of a software developer engineer that is really knowing all about software development to do that? Or can I be just quality or regulatory affairs person that know the standards, know what we have to find, and is working directly with those engineers to find the right information? Right.
So that's a good question. So personally, I don't have any software background. Okay. I'm not a software engineer. I'm not a programmer. Last time I told you, I came from a manufacturing engineer's background. I've worked in manufacturing engineers for 20 years in production environments. So I understand a bit about that, but I don't understand about software. So this is a different language to me. So I leave that to the software programmers. Now, this is where there's a bridge of collaboration, because software engineers don't know about regulations. And most times when I speak to them, they don't know about medical device regulations. Very often, they've come from a hardcore software background, programming, and now suddenly you tell them that your software is a medical device. What does that mean to them? So this is new territory. You now have to then put all of the boxes of regulatory in place. and you have to start making this easy to understand for people, which is a completely new territory. And this is where I tend to work best as a regulatory expert. I know the regulations, I know the boxes and the framework that's required, and I then advise those people who are the software engineers what you need to do to meet the regulations and what are the documents that you need to produce to fulfill the requirements of 62304. And that's the way it works.
No, I think it's great because, as we said, also in the medical device field, they mainly tell you where to go, where to arrive, but how to go there, which route you have to choose. You have to build it yourself. So you, as a regulatory affairs person or a quality person, plus the software engineer who knows more about the software, this team, if I can say, can work together to really arrive to this objective, because maybe the software engineer has also some ideas how to prove this or how to prove that or how to answer these requirements from the IEC standard. You are helping actually some companies about that. So you offer this service as a consultant for IEC 62304. Is it correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So I help a lot of companies, especially there's a lot of startup companies that they don't seem to have the understanding and the knowledge of 62304. It's a very niche area, and there's a lot of companies where I've helped for all sorts of things, from everything from predictive cardiac arrest to IT health management to Alzheimer's brain issues or dementia, this type of thing, and even monitoring for orthopedic purposes as well. There's lots of areas, screening for cancers. It's endless. The number of things that are coming up in different scenarios is very interesting because it's also new territory in terms of regulations as well. What do we do in such and such? But I think the MDCG document that I mentioned, 2019-11, is an excellent document for guidance because it gives you some actual examples at the back of it of different types of software, how to classify them, what classifications, what risk, how to define it. Is it a medical device? Isn't it a medical device? It's a very easy to understand document. And that's for me, I would advise most people, that's a good starting point. Have a look at the MDCG document.
Exactly. I looked at it and I read it, and it was great because they give some examples. It's not like just giving some theory things. No, if your software is just for storing some files, information, but it's not really taking any decisions, etc. They give you really some examples of those kind of software that maybe are used in hospitals or this or that. So it's mainly something that is really helping because they are really, it's expensive. They say example 1, example 2, etc., which is helping a lot. In terms of Pharmi Med Limited, so how can you support those companies that are now working on that? So you offer this consulting. I think you have maybe also some, I know you are offering templates, but I don't know. Are you offering templates on IEC 62304?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So what we've done previously is that we have had a guidance document before the MDCG document came out. Actually, we had our own version. is a unofficial guidance document from Pharmi Med to try and make it easier for software developers to understand what does it mean in 62304, what the definitions are, what the classifications and the examples. So we put all the examples into one document. So we have a software as a medical device guidance document, and also a checklist which breaks down all of the clauses and the sub-clauses of 62304 and the requirement and what evidence the medical device manufacturer actually has that can fulfill that specific requirement. So this is a checklist that we produced, and it then enables a categorization for the manufacturer to see what sort of health they're in, where if there are lots of non-conformities or minor or major, or they're in a good green situation, so if a healthy situation, so they've got all the requirements. And very often what you find is that even software developers that don't have 62304, an understanding of it or any knowledge of it, they will actually have some methodology that they've been following. Because what you find is the traditional waterfall diagram, which some people might call from the user requirements, the design inputs, outputs, verification, validation. This is known as the waterfall diagram. And then you have the agile system, which looks at a more of a linear approach. And this is an approach which most manufacturers are now starting to use. Agile, they have different systems that they use, different methodologies. But the principal key thing is that when we look through the checklist and the requirements for 62304, there will be many things that the manufacturer is doing, and they can tick the box and we have it completed, but it might be called something else.
Okay.
So let's take, for example, problem resolution is one of the requirements that's needed, which is actually customer feedback. But it's been done in a very specific way where it's needed in software terminology, and even the quality management system, your ISO 13485, should also be aligned to the terminology for 62304. Because your medical device is a software, you need to start thinking about specific language for medical device, but even more specific language for software as a medical device. So you should also have a procedure for software development lifecycle. What is your company's approach to SDLC? Are you using waterfall diagram? Are you using Agile? Are you using a different system? This should all be outlined in the SDLC procedure. And then when it comes to complaints and feedback, or even change, for example, if you make any change to the software, how do you document the change? Now, one thing that we know for sure is that software is not the same as any other medical device like hardware or something where you're having patches and releases on a very regular basis.
Yeah.
So how do you then manage the changes for this? Are you making a change control or a change for the design every time? Well, of course, this is not practical. So this is why you have to have an approach. And one of the documents that you have to produce is a software development plan. In the software development plan, you can outline all of this approach and how you are managing the changes and feedback and everything can be all documented in the software development plan. And then one of the important things also is, like we understand very clearly in the regulatory world, is that once you do something, you don't archive it and you don't stick it in a cupboard and it's finished. You have to maintain.
Exactly, improvements. So it's PDCS, so how to maintain everything each time.
So we have something in software called software maintenance plan also. So you have to then have some kind of plan of how you're maintaining the software and changes and continuous, so that's also very important.
No, I think it's great. So as you mentioned, so there is this guidance that you create. So is it something that we can offer to people to download?
Yeah, so what we'll do is I will hopefully give you the software as a medical device guidance document. I will give you that you can then make that available for your viewers and listeners, and they can download all that for free from your website, wherever you think is the best place. And then after that, there's lots of templates that we have also produced. There's something like 10 or 15 templates, which are all of the requirements as outputs from 62304. So do you have a software development plan? Yes, well, we've got a template. Do you have an integration and regression testing document? Yes, we have a template. Maintenance plan? Yes, we have a template. Problem resolution for feedback? Yes, we have a template. So all of these things, we have developed these templates to make it easier for manufacturers to cut out some of the work and to hold their hands a little bit and point them towards the right direction of, okay, there's interpreting the 62304 requirements can be very, very complicated. The templates will provide you at least some kind of guidance to fulfilling the documentation requirements. So an auditor, when they're reviewing the documentation, these are the sort of things that they will ask them. Show me your software development plan and show me your software testing and all of the other documentation. So that's something that we've provided. At the moment, it's not available on our website, but we should hopefully be able to make that available on our website for download in the next week or so.
Okay, no problem. So I will mention anyway the link for download of this guidance, and please go to Pharmi Med Limited website and look at the package for IEC 62304 templates. I think maybe it will be available when we'll really have this episode released to people. Okay, Adnan. So I think it's helping a lot. I think people are now do understand really well what is 62304, when they should apply it, and I hope they will have more successful within this kind of software. medical device software are something that is really growing now. As you mentioned, there is a lot of startups that start to use that. So usually they maybe hear a lot about ISO 13485 for quality management system. They also have to hear more about IEC 62304 because it's also a standard they have to apply to that. So don't hesitate also to contact Adnan. If you have any question, go to his LinkedIn page. I will put everything on the show notes for that. Okay, Adnan, some last word for the audience?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, actually, just because you mentioned the QMS about 13485, I don't want the audience to be confused because there's a clause within ISO 13485, which is 4.2.6, which is validating software which is used in the quality management system.
Yeah.
Again, this is not something to be confused with because this is the quality management system. So it could be, for example, any purchasing software. Some people use SAP or any MRP system or any other QMS that they're using. This is
control, etc. Yeah.
Doc control. It's not the same. If you want to look at within ISO 13485, where does it tell me to do the software validation? It will not tell you in this specific way, but look at clause 7, product realization, because this is where the fulfillment is required to fulfill all the requirements for clause 7. And that is where I just wanted to clarify that point about the QMS.
No problem. It's good. Don't worry. No problem for me. And I hope it helps also the audience to get more clarification. Great. So Adnan, thank you for your help. Thank you for all the information you provide, and thank you for the guideline that people can download from the show notes. And I hope to see you in another episode. So thank you, and I wish you a nice day.
You too. Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.